Welcome to the In Transit podcast, a place where we discuss all things supply chain. I'm your host, Vishnu Rajamanickam. In this episode, we are joined by Bill Catania, the founder and CEO of last mile fulfillment tech firm OneRail, to discuss the approaching peak retail season and how retailers can stay resilient in the face of changing market dynamics. Retail sales this year have been a letdown compared to the previous year as demand struggles to keep pace with consumers who are looking to spend more on services after a couple of years of overspending on retail. Challenges persist on the supply side too, with PPI numbers remaining high. Inflation is still a concern. Transport costs are above pre-pandemic levels and fuel costs are on the rise. A sizable portion of retail businesses still have issues with high inventory to sales ratios as stock turnover days exceed the pre-pandemic norm. This ties up capital, and combined with overloaded inventories, it becomes a significant challenge for retail operations. Bill joins us this episode to share insights on how retailers can navigate these hurdles by delivering exceptional final mile fulfillment experiences. We'll touch on the importance of omnichannel strategies, the need to enhance demand forecasting capacities, and ways for retailers to remain competitive in this ever-changing landscape. So let's dive right ahead into the conversation. Hey Bill, welcome to the In Transit podcast.
Vishnu, thank you. I appreciate it. It's great to connect with you again.
Nice to have you here, Bill. You're right on time for the peak freight season, or probably not, as the freight market isn't looking great today. US retailers have ordered way less inventories this year, anticipating, low consumer demand this peak season. What are your thoughts on this? How do you see this peak season playing out for the retailers, and what do you think they should do?
Well, yeah, it's a great question. Though it may be a bit soft, it's still peak season. It's still going to put stress on the supply chain. There's still a lot of big decisions to make if you're a retailer or product manufacturer, and if you're a logistics operator. You have to plan for it just like any other peak season. So the dynamics and sort of the physics of the problem are the same. It's just how you're doing it, may be a bit different. So with softness, retailers really need to think about their relationships with their customers. They really have to think about how they can win the next sale, right? And if you think about what Amazon did really well, it started with really great data, but it was also followed up with really great demand planning and a logistics network that couldn't be more resilient or elastic. You have to really think about, how do you win more? How do you win the next sale? If you can get a customer through the door during a soft time, you really need to think about how you can sell more to that customer. And that really translates into the importance of how, removing friction, lowering cost, improving visibility. All of those things become very important. And it doesn't minimize the fact that there's still going to be some of the traditional issues we deal with during a peak season. There's been somewhat of a reset in how a lot of the logistics networks are operating. A lot of them, especially in the freight market, have made adjustments. Supply and demand is efficient. But when you get into the last mile market, you have a little bit of a different set of circumstances because you don't have mature shipping lanes. You don't have the notion of a lane. And you have a little bit more unstructured capacity. So being able to structure capacity, being able to make sure that you can extend a service promise to your customer and then follow through with it is part of that value equation more than ever.
Totally. I'd like to double click on the customer experience bit here, but in the context of delivery speed, Bill. So how crucial is the pace of delivery versus delivery visibility to consumers? I understand that they're both pretty important last mile metrics, but do you see customers kind of tilting in favor of either of them?
There's a third component that I would argue is maybe even coupled with visibility, the most important, which would be dependability. So it's really dependability and visibility are the two most important factors. Speed is always important. Being able, if you're a retailer or a product manufacturer, to align the service possibilities, the service levels that are available to your customers is more important than ever. But being able to provide visibility to it and be able to be dependable, do what you say you're going to do, are by far the two most important factors.
Got it. I wanted to extend the conversation on the retailers and the fulfillment experience, but by discussing about inventory planning, which I believe is on the other side of the spectrum, right? So I guess it's quite challenging right now to plan for inventory because, e-commerce is in the fray. There's a lot more packaging involved compared to physical retail. There's so much more. There's a significant increase in the need for storage space. And since storage capacity isn't cheap or it isn't that available, it kind of creates quite a problem with planning. And it doesn't just stop there, does it? Like, consumers today demand more product variety, and that means retailers have to stock more SKUs, and that makes inventory planning that much more harder. So I would have taken a while to come to the question, but what do you reckon, Bill? How can companies improve their planning and also, of course, their demand forecasting capacities?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So if you really sort of ask the 5 whys, right, and to get to the root cause of the problem. And it's not that the problem is a symptom of a bad habit or an inefficiency. It's a symptom of transformation. So if you think about omnichannel itself, omnichannel creates the need to have decentralized inventory. So if you go back to sort of a multi-channel world where you had bricks and mortar stores and you have DCs, the DCs, they can fulfill the e-commerce orders, and the bricks and mortar stores can fulfill product out the front door. That's not the world we're in anymore. We're living in a world now where it all has to be synchronous, right? It all has to work together. It has to be fluid. And as inventory has become decentralized, meaning inventory is being fulfilled out of the store for an e-commerce order, not just e-com via parcel, but delivery, home delivery. That's introduced a whole nother array of problems for retailers and for shippers in general. So that decentralization is key. And then, yes, variety is key. So customers want more selection than ever. They want fast, efficient, affordable delivery and shipping. So to do that puts a lot of pressure on a store, a lot of pressure. So if you kind of go through that thought process, it creates more than ever a dependency on inventory visibility. You have to see where the inventory is at all times. That's the first thing. And you'd be really surprised how many retailers and shippers really don't have visibility to their inventory in real time, or if they do, it's not synchronous with what's being sold out the front door. So you can have e-commerce orders happening in one stream of transactions and call it bricks and mortar transactions happening at the point of sale. And sometimes those two things don't talk, right? And that's typically a function of maybe two different OMSs, could be two different inventory management systems. That's not uncommon. But then if you really want to compound the problem, there's not enough communication, or in most cases, 80% plus of the circumstances, the transportation system that's executing the shipping doesn't always have real-time visibility to where the inventory is. So the inability to rate shop transportation, to find the lowest cost, most dependable path doesn't exist. There's sort of call it a static process that says if Vishnu is in zip code A and store is in zip code Y, that's the closest store, then that's where you must fulfill the inventory from. And that's really the wrong way to do it. You really should have a fluid view of your inventory such that it picks the inventory from the right place at the right time that's most efficient to fulfill to that customer. And what we see are a lot of baskets that are abandoned in the e-commerce experience because a customer might want to buy 10 things, but the OMS is saying, well, only 9 of those things are in stock at the store that's closest to Vishnu. In that case, there's no solution for that order, and it just cancels the order. And that, believe it or not, is the rule, not the exception right now. So it's really a triangulation of variables, of inventory, of consumer, and transportation that all have to work in real time, synchronously, to be able to optimize that inventory problem. There's a lot of product that's getting left on the shelf because it's losing in that equation, and it's making it even more difficult for retailers to provide the selection and the dependability and the affordable shipping, because it's a virtuous cycle of problems.
This reminds me of the issue with data interoperability, in the sense that there are a lot of data streams going on within transport operations, and they aren't interacting properly enough.
Yeah.
From what I see, this lack of alignment between different options and different processes is kind of a crucial issue, especially if we are looking at all the omni-channel options that companies are putting forward for fulfillment. So how challenging is this scenario for shippers, Bill?
Oh, it's exceptionally challenging, right? The problem is there's no one way to solve the problem. What we have is this legacy tech stack that many retailers have, and that tech stack may have 4 or 5 different systems that are not talking to each other, or they're not talking to each other accurately, or they're not talking to each other fast enough. And whenever you start to introduce those choke points, you start losing efficiency. And I think that's notable. Right now, the retailers realized during COVID that they have a lot of work to do. And that was about a 2-year period after COVID. So say 2022, even early 23, most retailers kind of got to that point and did whatever it took to meet the new demand, call it the new demand for e-commerce. And now most retailers are in a mode where they're really trying to figure out what can they leave behind. Are there streamlining technologies that will allow them to maybe eliminate 2 or 3 systems for the sake of having one system that has that fully coupled capability to not only see data but act upon it. So it's not only visibility, but it's execution technology that's required to be able to become efficient. And if I relate to the other example, you asked how hard omnichannel is. It's really hard, because if you go back to the early 2000s, when we were in the beginning of multi-channel, when e-commerce really started to become a channel, companies like Walmart, believe it or not, licensed their e-commerce business away to companies that specialized in e-commerce fulfillment. They didn't even own their e-commerce. It was a different company operating Walmart.com. Most people don't know that. That's probably because I'm old now and remember it. But the reality is, your e-commerce business has to be fully synchronous. So there's a number of dependent systems: TMS, OMS, e-com platform, omni-channel orchestration capabilities don't exist in any of those systems. So you need some type of unifying technology to bring them together so they can talk in real time. And then you start introducing things like parcel shipping systems that generate a label. You start introducing couriers and carriers that offer same day and next day delivery. Well, what do they integrate to? So you start dealing with a lot of problems, and the root cause is in executing omnichannel, the ability to align your systems for real-time decisioning and execution. And then the second thing, not to underscore the operational dependencies. That's one of the things that we see as being one of the biggest risks to omnichannel, is how do you get your whole company to align operationally down at the store level, with the store being able to fulfill orders. That's a big challenge operationally, especially when you start talking about 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, 15,000 stores.
This is actually making me wonder if omnichannel strategies is something that can actually help level the playing field when compared to the large and omnipresent retailers versus the small SME retailers, right? So, do you see this? Jumping back to our discussion on fulfillment experiences in itself, do you think omnichannel strategies for the last mile is something that all kinds of retailers can leverage, irrespective of the scale and the size of their business?
I absolutely do. And, I could make a case either way. I think it's actually more challenging in some ways for bigger retailers because they have more gravity to fight, right? They have more change management to deal with. Their CapEx is so much bigger. If they have 20,000 shopping lanes versus none, right? If you're a Shopify retailer, if you're pure e-commerce, or even a small retailer that might only have 100 stores, 10 lanes a store, 1,000 shopping lanes. So the more CapEx, the more complexity. The answer is yes. The complexities are just different, right? Whether you're a large retailer or a small retailer. What it really comes down to is the commitment to change. You have to make a commitment. OneRail just announced about a month ago that we went live with Lowe's Home Improvement. We're powering omni-channel orchestration, same-day delivery at Lowe's in all 1,700 stores. That was a really big decision that Lowe's had to make, more than a year ago to be committed to the systems changes, the IT and product development that had to happen for them to be able to offer omni-channel to their customers. The selection process of finding a partner like OneRail that can really streamline that capability set and deliver it to them, along with the capacity, right? We're bringing our 12 million driver network to the table to be able to ensure that same day delivery can happen. And then the most important part, I'll say it over and over again, is the focus on change management in the store. Now, all of a sudden, there's a different way that products are picked and packed. There's a whole different management process that has to happen in order to enable that. And then getting to the omni-channel part of it, of course, omni-channel is being able to experience a retailer the same way, no matter if you go in the store, online, or via mobile. That's the thing that Lowe's has done really well, is the full commitment to online. If I'm a consumer, I can order, but also in store, which we just started doing, where you can go to the point of sale and actually trigger a delivery. That's true omni-channel. And that commitment is not one to be taken lightly. I'd have to say it's not hard. It's really just getting to the place that you can be fully committed to it. There's nothing worse than half a commitment. And in the case of Lowe's as an example, obviously they're our customer, but they've made a full commitment, and that's the reason we're so excited about that opportunity. And that's why I think they're successful in that transition.
Interesting. What are some of the common challenges or headwinds that you see companies struggle with that can be solved with a bit of focus? Kind of like the low-hanging fruits out there.
Well, the one that's probably the easiest to solve for them is the biggest challenge, which is the cross-functional interdependencies. So if you go back again, even 10 years, maybe even 5 years, many decisions around, hey, are we going to offer same day delivery? Are we going to offer some type of expedited delivery from store? Are we going to turn our stores into warehouses? Transportation was really on the hook for that decision. And what's happened is now you're seeing companies with emerging heads of omnichannel, EVP omnichannel, VP omnichannel. You're starting to see even e-commerce splinter off into an omnichannel role. And that's a big difference from where the world was 5 years ago and especially 10 years ago. So no longer, in most cases, does transportation sort of sit in a silo and make these decisions. It's not purely a procurement-based decision. It's a strategic decision. So that means it's now more cross-functional. So it's not uncommon for OneRail to see, a president of store ops get involved in a decision. It's not uncommon to see a chief digital officer or chief customer officer getting very involved in making a decision. And it's especially not uncommon now to see a CEO say, this is what we're going to do, and then aligning their team to that objective. The other thing I'll say that's an interesting transformation is the role of the chief supply chain officer. For many years, the head of supply chain sat under operations. They reported to the COO as an operational function. You're starting to see more and more now the chief supply chain officer being a C-level role that reports to the CEO. That, to me, is one of the leading indicators whether a company is really ready to be an omni-channel leader or not. If they don't have a C-level, because there's companies that have a chief supply chain officer, but they don't report to the CEO. That's a really good indicator they're not ready for omni-channel transformation yet.
Talking of transformation and just the idea that supply chains are slowly not being looked at like a cost center, but probably like a service differentiator in itself. What is the trend looking like, Bill? I'm looking to compare the pre-pandemic status quo with what's happening today. Do you see that companies are a lot more open to discussions on visibility? Do you see management being more open, adopting technologies, even it involves a significant bit of investment right at the start?
Yeah, if you look at a really practical example, it gets back to the way a lot of the solutions that retailers have relied upon, for many years, how they were architected. And it gets back to that very simple example of, I'm a retailer, I now have decentralized my inventory, which means I'm relying on my order management system to tell me where product is. If that retailer is allowing kind of I call it a static decision to be made. In other words, again, Julia is sitting in zip code 27106. Therefore, the closest store to Julia is where the order must be fulfilled from. If that logic exists, they're not ready to really optimize omnichannel yet. And here's why. That type of scenario, first of all, doesn't have the right kind of visibility. So when we talk about visibility, it's a term that's been used a lot, since 2017, 2018. Pandemic probably made it the most used word on CNBC for a while, which is great, right? Supply chain was never really talked about much. But when it comes to visibility, it has to be the right kind of visibility. And it has to be the type of visibility that's real time, that then has execution capabilities tied to it. So simply knowing that the inventory is in locations A, B, and C is great. But the reality is most retailers don't have that real-time capability to make a decision if the visibility tells them that the inventory is not in the right location. Then what? So do you just let the cart be abandoned? Do you just cancel the order? And unfortunately, that's where a lot of paths end. Is a customer being told, sorry, the inventory is not available, when actually it is available, maybe 8 miles further. And this is the crux of I think, my answer. Retailers have been hyper-focused on the lowest possible delivery cost without contemplating loss of margin when an order is abandoned. So if you can follow the logic, if I could see every store in a market, every store, all the inventory at every store in Dallas, Texas, and I now have a solution that says, hey, you can fulfill this product. It's going to be another $4 of cost in delivery. The retailer, more times than not, should be willing to accept that extra cost if it allows the order to go through. Because what's happening is most orders are defaulting to a cancel if the order inventory is not available in full at the closest store to the shopper. That triangulation between inventory, transportation, and consumer is absolutely critical. And that's where I see, and where we see at OneRail, one of the greatest limitations right now to making omnichannel truly work. So it's static logic versus dynamic logic and execution capabilities. It's the next unlock. It's the next chapter in enabling omnichannel to really work the way it's supposed to.
That's pretty comprehensive, Bill. I think in the end, it kind of boils down to better streamline data and processes, and add on good visibility to build better omnichannel networks. Thanks for that. But before we end our conversation, what's your biggest piece of advice for retailers to navigate these challenging times, Bill? What's that one thing they should absolutely focus on to come ahead in the market?
Yeah, there's short-term and long-term advice. Unfortunately, sometimes retail, just given the size of it, especially when you start dealing with many, many stores and many, many departments now that are impacted by these decisions, it's difficult to make a big decision, or shall I say it's difficult to make a decision that can have massive impact that doesn't take a lot of time. A lot of time in, first of all, diagnosing what your problem is. Second of all, allowing the time to find the right partners and solutions, and then implementing it, and then change management, right? That's how you always hear, overnight change in retail can take 2 to 3 years. But when we break it down into short term versus long term, short term, there's solutions out there now that are aggregating capacity. OneRail is one of them. There's the ability to get a lot more fluidity and elasticity in your last mile capacity. That's the lowest fruit. That's a solution that could be ready in a month, with very little tech lift, to be able to offer more fluidity. And that's something that exists today without having to get Congress involved, if you will. But the bigger decision is, how can you streamline your tech stack? If you look at tech stacks and you look at the different systems that enable e-commerce specifically, they're very linear. And that's the problem. They're very linear and they're very sequenced. And the reality is they need to be nonlinear and they need to be more vertical in real time. So solutions need to operate like this, not like this, because this is how commerce operates now. That's what omnichannel is all about. It's more of a vertical capability stack. So understand what's holding your capabilities back, reverse engineering that. And you know what? There may be 3, 4, 5 different things you don't even need in your stack anymore. So that rationalization is not easy, but it takes a really close look at how do you streamline that stack? Because the more you remove from the stack, the more single source of truth you have, the more accuracy and speed you have. And it gets you to that outcome of really fluidly being able to execute an omnichannel strategy. And then the third thing I would say, it kind of relates to the first thing I led with, which is the low fruit, is a multi-carrier strategy. There's nothing that'll hold back omnichannel more than a single carrier strategy. And when we see that, that's typically endemic of transportation, really probably having a little too much control over an omnichannel decision. And typically it means that there's not enough strategic minds at the table across the company. So if we find companies in a single carrier type strategy mindset, we move on to the next company. It's that simple. So really get strategic around multi-carrier mindset. That's what's going to unlock the fluidity and elasticity you need to execute today better, more accuracy, lower cost, more options for your customers, which is what they are looking for. But the harder decisions, the longer term decisions, you have to get real introspective about what you're trying to do. And then how do you rationalize, remove different elements of your tech stack, upgrade to some of the newer technologies that are out there that are API driven and cloud driven versus on-prem. We still see on-prem shipping platforms, which is mind boggling in 2023. So those are some of the things that I would say. And then the last thing, I know this is 4, I said I'd have 3, is returns. Well, you just cannot say enough about returns and the fact that that's the next big problem. Having a fluid returns process where a customer can return to the store or return to a return node, or even offering the ability to have returns picked up from a customer. It's why some of the leading e-commerce platforms have done such a great job companies like Wayfair, and of course, Amazon. Walmart's done a great job with returns. Returns are the key to success. Once you get past how to make it go forward, you got to make it go reverse. And customers are really looking at returns policies when they're deciding if they're going to buy from you. You know, that's something customers have become very intelligent around returns platforms. So that's the last thing I would say. If you can make it go forward, that's great. You got to make it be able to go in reverse as well.
Great, Bill. A lot of interesting insights, and I completely agree with returns and the potential of companies leveraging a great returns process. And especially with the peak season coming, I guess it's going to be a lot more important to have a solid and resilient returns process. It's been a wonderful time having you here, Bill. Appreciate you joining me on the show.
I appreciate it as well, Vishnu. Thank you. And hope the best for all of our retailers out there in the ecosystem this holiday season. I know as a customer, I'm looking forward to it. It's our favorite time of year, and it's always made better by a great retail experience. So thank you again for the time today to talk about this.
Thanks again.
This wraps up another episode of the In Transit podcast. To learn more or to hear previous episodes, check out our website at secmr.com/podcast/all or check the podcast segment on thelogisticsreport.com. Thank you for listening and have a wonderful day.